What's up, nerds? Today we're going to be talking about how Russia is losing multiple ships in its Black Sea fleet at a dizzying rate. We're going to be talking about the recent attack in the Black Sea, which sunk the Russian patrol ship, the Serhii Kotov. We're also going to be talking about the massive spike in Ukrainian claims for downing Russian aircraft, because there's a lot more going on in that story than you might think. Of course, this video is being recorded on March 5th, 2024. So let's start by discussing the attack in the Black Sea. First, of course, we've seen Ukraine strike a number of other Black Sea ships with unmanned vehicles. Last night, we saw Ukraine launch another attack. And this is definitely very interesting to digest because there are a lot of kind of things that we can take away from it, not just on what the future of naval warfare might look like to a degree, but also kind of how Ukraine is going about attacking the Black Sea. So first, there were a series of videos that were published showing the swarm by Ukraine basically swarming the Russian patrol ship, the Serhii Kotov. Now, this is actually the newest ship to the Russian Black Sea fleet. It was commissioned later on in 2022 after the war had already begun, and it had also already been attacked by Ukraine. However, it had managed to survive that attack. This time, they were not so lucky. It is a strong platform. It not only has the capability to get closer in on the coastline, it can launch cruise missiles, and it also has air defense capabilities. And we're going to talk about why that's very important here in just a second. But the tactics here that we can get out of these videos is very interesting. We see similar kind of tactics displayed in previous videos that Ukraine has published following other attacks on Black Sea ships, but I kind of want to digest what we're seeing here because this is fairly similar to what we've seen in other videos. Basically, you have multiple Ukrainian drones coming in there zigzagging. It's generally at nighttime, and they're trying to evade Russian fire, and they're trying to puncture a hole in the hull of the ship. Now, they're not just relying on that one puncture to sink the ship. They're actually creating a gap for a second drone to fly into that gap and then detonate a second blast. And hopefully, that detonates the magazine. And that's where we've seen several Russian ships actually get destroyed, kind of following the same tactic of multiple drones getting in very, very close, kind of trying to evade Russian defensive fire, puncturing a hole with a second drone going into that hole and detonating. So very interesting to see that kind of play out. I've noticed that kind of happening in multiple videos so far, and I wanted to kind of raise some awareness on how that's been going because it's been effective. It's been incredibly effective. They have sunk several Black Sea ships. In fact, 22% of the Russian Black Sea fleet has been destroyed to this point, and those are not just, small vessels. Some of these, that includes the Moskva, which was the capital ship. That includes a submarine. Some very, very, very high payoff targets have been destroyed thanks to unmanned drones and Ukraine's persistence to apply pressure on that fleet. Now, there are some issues defending against these small drones. I mean, first off, they're attacking at night. They're very small, and they're very low down onto the surface. So the Russian defense suite on their ships, appears to be the primary defense that they're using is machine guns. Pretty big machine guns, sure, but they're definitely not showing to be that effective in targeting these ships. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of how that impacts the U.S. Navy here in just a minute as well. Now, the remainder of the Russian Black Sea fleet is still pretty large and capable, so it shouldn't be discounted. This is definitely a worrying trend if you're a Russian, kind of seeing how all these ships keep getting popped, but at the same time, what remains of the Russian Black Sea fleet is no less incredibly dangerous and capable. So, the pro-Ukrainian crowd definitely don't write the Black Sea fleet off just yet. However, even despite all of this, we can definitely see that some pro-Russian accounts are incredibly upset by this attack, with some calling for the ships to be withdrawn and only small boats being used in the Black Sea. Now, I think that that's kind of silly and a bit of an exaggeration on their part, but we're going to have to wait and see how the Russian Ministry of Defense handles this situation because it's definitely trending in the wrong direction. One of the things that they might end up doing is they're having to station with the remaining Black Sea further and further and further out away from the coastline, basically out of the range of these unmanned drones. And that can actually be a win for Ukraine. Now, remember that one of Ukraine's biggest objectives right now is to target the Kerch Strait Bridge because of its strategic impact. It's allowing Russia to flow tons and tons of logistics in and out of Crimea from mainland Russia. Now, of course, Russia secured a land bridge. so they can just move resources in from Donetsk through Zaporizhia and then down through Ukraine. So there's more than one way to get resources in, especially if the Kerch Strait Bridge is destroyed. However, if the Ukrainians are able to effectively place fire on that land bridge, then the Kerch Strait Bridge becomes one of the safest routes. And it certainly is right now the safest route to get equipment in and out of Crimea, as well as personnel and other kinds of things. Of course, Ukraine's been wanting to target it. They've targeted it in the past. It is a very high value target. Now, here's where the Black Sea comes in, and here's where their air defense suite comes in, because it's not just the Russian Black Sea fleet's ability to do, say, like a potential amphibious assault, to launch cruise missiles. It's also their air defense suite and their radar systems that they're able to integrate with other air defense capabilities, and that really allows Russia to better protect the Kerch Strait Bridge and other parts of Crimea. Now, the further out you're having to place the Black Sea fleet from the coastline, the less capability and the less range you're able to implement in the protection of the Kerch Strait Bridge and some of those key sites in Crimea. Again, big win for Ukraine. That opens up opportunities not just to target the Kerch Strait Bridge, but to target other assets in Crimea. Now, I definitely want to talk just for a moment about what these small drones are kind of telling me about the future of naval warfare. And I'm not in the Navy, so I'm not going to act like any kind of expert. So if you're in the Navy, definitely let me know your thoughts here. However, I can imagine some terrorist groups definitely getting control of some of these. However, I would be shocked if they're able to get enough quantity of these small drones for it to really make a significant impact. Where I get more concerned is more an industrialized power like, say, China or Iran getting multiple of these and kind of using geography, like, say, the Strait of Taiwan or the Strait of Hormuz, and targeting U.S. naval vessels or other kinds of ships very frequently with these drones. Now, of course, I want to see kind of what a platform like CIWS, which is, a defense platform on naval ships. I want to see what that would do to drones. Having, a computer being able to track these kinds of drones, they are kind of fast, but they're not fast enough to evade CIWS. They might be able to, outmaneuver a human operator at nighttime, but how can they outmaneuver, an onboard computer that can track things incredibly accurately and deliver a defense capability against that object? So I kind of want to see how that plays out. I'll be shocked if that becomes a huge issue. However, what I'm kind of thinking about here is more for Taiwan. And the Philippines and some of these other countries that they're not going to be able to match the capabilities that, say, the Chinese Navy has. But they have a huge problem, a huge dilemma in defending their coastlines and defending their territory. So that's where obtaining massive quantities of these kinds of drones and deploying them can be a huge, huge benefit. They're definitely not going to make, let's not exaggerate the capability here. It's not going to make a Navy obsolete. It is a complement to existing defense capabilities, but it can also allow kind of these countries like Taiwan or the Philippines that might be a little under-resourced, but no less have significant naval threats that they have to deal with, to go and deal with those threats, especially against a superior opponent like, say, the People's Liberation Army Navy. So that's something that I've been thinking about, and I kind of want, and it also kind of increases the burden on every ship and the shipbuilder and the Navy to build ships and deploy them with enough defense capabilities to not only track these kinds of drones, but also to effectively defend against them. So not only electronic warfare, but things like CIWS or things like onboard computers with automated turrets that can track these things and take them out. But the Black Sea is not the only thing that is under duress from Ukraine right now, because Ukraine has had a massive spike in claimed shootdowns of Russian aircraft, not just fighter aircraft, but also fighter bomber aircraft. In fact, we've seen well over a dozen claims by Ukraine in recent weeks, claiming that they have targeted and shot down Russian aircraft. Now, this all follows the shootdown of the Russian A-50 AWACS aircraft, which is no doubt a huge impact on the Russian Air Force and a huge, basically, achievement by the Ukrainian Air Force. Even if the Ukrainians weren't necessarily the ones that shoot it down and it was the Russians shooting it down, the fact that the whole situation played out, it's a win for Ukraine. Now, since we've seen that, we've likely seen the grounding of the entire Russian A-50 fleet, which it's not that big of a fleet. And so in any case, the loss of that platform and that capability poses some challenges for Russia, because remember, the AWACS provides early warning detection, and it can permeate that early warning to other platforms like, say, fighter aircraft, and let those aircraft know, hey, we see that you're being targeted by ground air defense systems or something else, And so you need to either take defensive maneuvers or do whatever you need to do. With the grounding of the A-50 fleet, Russia's less capable of that kind of thing. Now, that being said, the spike in claims by Ukraine, I think, is a little less credible. I mean, that is just a staggering amount of losses from the Russian Air Force in such an amount of time. I think the burden of proof is certainly on Ukraine to prove that these shootdowns have actually been happening, and I don't think that we've necessarily seen that. And it's not just me saying that. There's a lot of pro-Ukrainian accounts also kind of echoing that sentiment. One of the big things that we like to see is visual evidence. Now, I understand that we're not necessarily going to get visual evidence on every shootdown every time. In fact, we saw one video from one prominent Ukrainian official showing a fire in a field, and he claimed that that was a Russian aircraft. It could have just been a brush fire. We don't really get enough from that video. What really happens here is if, Ukraine is claiming multiple shootdowns of Russian aircraft, there is no evidence that it's happened, and in fact, perhaps it did not happen, then they're really impacting their own credibility. Now, here are some things that could impact any kind of ability to get evidence of these shootdowns. For instance, if these aircrafts are going down in Russian-controlled territory, of course, the Russians are not going to release a lot of evidence if they don't have to that a shootdown occurred. There are some pro-Russian accounts, like Fighter Bomber, that have been pretty reputable in kind of reinforcing whether or not a loss had happened. But they've been pretty quiet recently, especially on this issue. That could be for a couple of reasons. That could be because there have been no shootdowns, or because the shootdowns have become grossly exaggerated, or because there are shootdowns, and because they're trying to basically put a lid on the amount of losses, because that could be a significant problem for Russia. Not necessarily saying it's one or the other, just saying that these are some factors that kind of play into our assessment on whether or not these claims are legit. One of the claims from a Ukrainian source was that Ukraine had managed to exploit a flaw in Russian software on board the fighter aircraft and the fighter bomber aircraft that basically allowed the fighter to understand when it was being targeted and attacked by an incoming missile. This exploit allowed Ukraine to turn that system off effectively, which basically prevents the Russian aircraft from knowing when they are being attacked. I haven't seen too much to see if that is incredibly credible. I think that is one indicator that maybe something happened. That might be one explanation for why something's happened, if in fact that is what has happened. But we've also seen another indicator that Russian pilots are reportedly becoming more and more wary of flying these kinds of sorties. Now, up to this point, because the airspace has been pretty well contested by both sides, not necessarily because they have strong air forces. I mean, the Russians have a strong air force, but really because of the air defense capabilities on both sides. A lot of the Russian aircraft have been flying over Russian-controlled territory and then basically turning around, so not really flying over Ukrainian-held territory. So I think that there is something to, a lot of Russian aircraft going down over Russian-controlled territory, and then some of the evidence of that shoot down basically being covered up or denied. At the same time, we really have to take everything as indicators. Nothing in and of itself is proof unless we get some kind of visual evidence that, an aircraft had been destroyed and we see the wreckage and we see really the tail number to be able to validate that. Now, of course, we've talked about how this is all leading to some criticism of Ukraine and how it might impact their credibility. Of course, during wartime, both sides have an incentive to either exaggerate kind of their achievements or downplay their failures. And we might be kind of seeing some of that in this case. Again, it really comes down to what is the evidence that we're receiving? What are the indicators that we're collecting? And right now, we're not getting a ton. It's not the best situation right now, despite the fact that Ukraine has been pretty open with how it's been shooting down so many aircraft. So I want to get your thoughts on this issue because it's pretty interesting, right? And I want to know what you think about these claims, if you think that these claims are legit or not, and why you think that that is. So with all that, I will talk to you all tomorrow on some more stuff, and I will see you all next time. Later.